The Roman Civil Wars and the Birth of the Empire, c. 80 BC, 14 AD. Crossing the Rubicon. On the 10th of January in the year 49 BC, one of the most seismic events of ancient history occurred. That day, Gaius Julius Caesar, a Roman political leader and military commander who over the past 10 years had conquered Gaul, a region approximating to modern-day France and the Low Countries, crossed over the River Rubicon into central Italy. This might seem like an insignificant event, but the Romans had many years earlier decreed that the small River Rubicon in the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy was the boundary beyond which no Roman commander was allowed to proceed any further south towards Rome with legionaries under his command. The decree had been made to prevent any general trying to seize power in the capital. In crossing the Rubicon, Caesar was effectively declaring war on the Republican government of Rome in response to the Senate's efforts to curb his growing powers. His actions have made the term crossing the Rubicon a synonym for an action which passes the point no return. Alea iacta est proclaimed Caesar at the time, the die is cast. He would either achieve total power over Rome or face defeat. This is the story of how the Roman Republic was brought to an end, largely owing to Caesar's actions. Pompeius Magnus. In reality, the story of how the Roman Republic came to an end and was replaced by the Roman Empire does not start with Julius Caesar. It actually begins with a near contemporary and his great rival for power, a man known to history as Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great. Pompey emerged as a supporter of Sulla, the Roman general who briefly established himself as dictator of Rome between 82 BC and 79 BC, before relinquishing power and retiring to his country estate. In the years that followed, Pompey gained several military commands in the east and won a series of major wars there over Rome's two great enemies in the eastern Mediterranean, the Kingdom of Pontus in what is now northern Turkey and the Seleucid Empire in the Levant. By the mid-60s BC, Pompey had vanquished both states and overseen the conversion of these regions into Roman provinces, while also establishing several powers there, such as the Kingdom of Judea, as clients of vassals of Rome. He returned to Rome as the most popular and powerful figure in the Roman Republic, lauded as Pompey the Great on account of his conquests. The First Triumvirate. Caesar was 6 years younger than Pompey, and his political ascent began later than Pompey's, in part because he had been on the other side of the civil war that had brought Sulla to power and had only barely escaped from Sulla's term as dictator alive. In the late 70s BC and into the 60s BC, he began his political career in Rome, aligning with the populists in the city. Eventually, he acquired the office of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, and soon was elected as consul for a year. Around this time, he, Pompey, and a third figure called Marcus Crassus, an enormously wealthy Roman who was reputedly the richest man in the Republic, formed a political alliance whereby they would seek to share power between the three of them. This was known as the First Triumvirate. Owing to it, an uneasy peace descended across the Republic as Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus became the dominant entities, but their individual quests for power would soon lead to a new civil war. Caesar's Gallic Wars. In 59 BC, Caesar was able to choose a province in which he wanted to become governor of for a term, a perquisite of having just served a term as consul in Rome. He chose southern Gaul, a region which equates to southern France and the border into what is now northern Italy. His plan in doing so was to campaign over the Alps and into Gaul proper, a region where a mass of Celtic tribes remained independent from Rome and a powerful entity in their own right. Over the next decade, he would engage in one of the most strategically brilliant military campaigns undertaken by any Roman general, conquering all of Gaul and adjoining regions, a landmass equivalent to much of modern-day France, Belgium, Luxembourg, parts of the Netherlands, and Switzerland. In doing so, he won enormous renown back in Rome. Before long, the first triumvirate collapsed as Crassus was killed while campaigning against the Parthian Empire in the east. Following this, Pompey felt his position as Rome's greatest general was threatened by the rise of Caesar as the new conquering hero of the 50s BC. The stage was set for a showdown between Caesar and Pompey. Caesar versus Pompey. It was not simply that Caesar and Pompey were rivals. Increasingly, they were the leaders of two rival factions. Caesar was the head of the Populares, a group of Roman politicians who had little respect for the traditions of the Roman Senate and instead tried to claim power by gaining the support of the wider population of Rome. The other faction led by Pompey was the optimates, the traditional and more conservative faction within the Senate. They viewed Caesar and his followers as dangerous demagogues. Thus, in the late 50s BC, they began moving to have Caesar charged with multiple breaches of Roman law and the bounds of his authority in Gaul. It was this effort to undermine him in Rome which eventually led Caesar in 49 BC to bring his legions south from Gaul and to cross the Rubicon, signaling the commencement of a civil war between the supporters of Caesar and Pompey. The war would last for years, with separate fronts in places like Hispania and Sicily being fought well into the 30s BC by supporters of Pompey who refused to accept Caesar's victory. But in reality, the main war was over very quickly. Pompey and the optimates left Italy in 49 BC before Caesar and his men reached Rome. They regrouped and gathered their forces in Greece, where Caesar pursued them. In the late summer of 48 BC, the decisive battle was fought at Pharsalus. Here, Caesar won a major victory against the Pompeians. Pompey then fled to Egypt, where supporters of Caesar killed him. Meanwhile, Caesar, who in 49 BC, after crossing the Rubicon and entering Rome, had claimed the power of dictators, a constitutional mechanism whereby a military commander could hold greater powers than any other figure in the Republic to deal with an emergency of some kind, returned to Rome. There he did not relinquish the power of dictatores once the military emergency of the Civil War passed, and began to rule Rome in a monarchical fashion. Unlike Cornelius Sulla 3.5 decades earlier, there seemed to be no possibility that Caesar would retire quietly to his country estate. The death of the dictator and the second triumvirate. Caesar introduced wide-ranging reforms in Rome following his victory over Pompey and the optimates, some of which are still with us in ways we often do not appreciate. For instance, the Gregorian calendar, which is used in most countries today, is a slightly altered version of the Julian calendar devised by Caesar and his government. The month of July is named after Julius's. Calendars aside, not everyone was happy with their would-be monarch. Regional civil wars continued to rage in some of the provinces. More importantly, there was a growing opposition party within Rome itself, some of the members of which were former allies of Caesar's who wished for him to now relinquish power like Sulla had done years earlier. Caesar did not, and in early 44 BC, he even declared himself to hold the power of dictators for life. This was a step too far for those who had major reservations about his actions, and on the Ides of March, the 15th day of that month, in 44 BC, a large gang of senators crowded around Caesar in the Senate and stabbed him repeatedly. He died there and then in the Senate. Nevertheless, there would be a return to normal republican government. In the months that followed, former allies of Caesar scrambled to gather their own support bases in order to succeed him. The three most prominent men involved were Mark Antony, a general and close ally of Caesar's, Caesar's great-nephew Octavian, and another commander and politician called Marcus Lepidus, who had governed Rome on Caesar's behalf back in 48 BC when he was in Greece battling Pompey. Together they formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC and began to divide power in what remained of the Republic between them. Eventually, though, as the years went by and as their power bases grew, it became clear that the choice was one between whether Octavian or Mark Antony as to who would succeed Caesar as the all-but ruler of Rome. The War of Actium. In the course of the 30s, BC, Lepidus would fall away as a rival, and the struggle for power in the Republic would become one between Octavian and Antony, with Octavian holding power over the western provinces and Antony in the east, where he developed a relationship with Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. For a time, an uneasy truce held between them, but over time their rivalry intensified. Eventually, Octavian convinced the Senate in Rome that Antony was set on splitting the Republic's territories in two and becoming a despotic king of the eastern provinces. Hence, in 32 BC, Octavian and the Senate went to war with Antony and Cleopatra in the east. It would not be a protracted conflict and is known as the War of Actium, after the one major battle that decided it. This was an immense naval battle in the waters near Actium, off the northwestern coast of Greece, in September 31st BC. There, Octavian won a comprehensive victory. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where they both committed suicide the following year as Octavian's armies pursued them to North Africa. The civil wars were over, and Caesar's great-nephew was victorious. The Principate and Rome's first emperor. Victory in the War of Actium and the death of Mark Antony left Octavian in undisputed control of the Roman state. However, he did not engage in a power grab of the kind which his great-uncle had years earlier. Wary of how Caesar had pushed the limits of what the Roman political classes would tolerate, Octavian decided on a much shrewder approach. In 27 BC, he introduced a series of constitutional changes. He did not declare himself to be a dictator. Instead, he adopted a series of titles and powers, all while making it clear that he was now the first citizen of Rome, not its ruler, but the first among equals. We should be in no doubt, though. Octavian had claimed absolute power, and over time one of the titles he had claimed, Imperator, a title meaning commander, came to define the new political dispensation. We know the term as emperor today, and the state he created as the Roman Empire. In addition to adopting the title of Imperator, he also changed his name to Caesar Augustus, Caesar in honor of his great-uncle, and Augustus meaning revered one. Over the next 41 years of his long reign, Augustus brought peace and prosperity. Augustan culture flourished, with great writers and poets like Virgil and Ovid producing some of the foremost Roman literature ever produced, while Augustus also began a monumental building project in Rome, famously quipping that he found Rome a city of brick and left it one of marble. The Roman Empire was born. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button. For more content like this, subscribe to the channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. For now, we bid you adieu. See you in the next one.